When Donald Trump appeared on live television that evening, the energy in the studio was already charged. He had built a reputation on being unpredictable, often saying things that others in politics wouldn't dare. Viewers at home were waiting to see what he would do this time. He leaned forward in his chair, locked eyes with the camera, and in his signature blunt delivery, he dropped a line that would immediately grab everyone's attention. With no hesitation, he called Barack Obama a psycho. It wasn't softened with any explanation, nor wrapped in a larger argument. It was a raw, direct insult, delivered in front of a national audience. The room reacted instantly. The audience, which had been buzzing with chatter moments before, went quiet for a second. That pause was heavy, like the collective air had been sucked out of the studio. A few gasps could be heard, and even the host shifted uncomfortably in his chair, unsure whether to move the conversation forward or let the silence hang. Trump's supporters, scattered throughout the audience, gave a few approving claps, but even they seemed caught off guard at the bluntness of the remark. Trump himself looked confident, almost pleased with the effect of his words. He leaned back slightly, as if daring anyone in the room to challenge what he had just said. It was the kind of remark that played perfectly into his larger-than-life persona, brash, unapologetic, and always aiming for maximum shock value. He knew the cameras would capture every expression, every flicker of surprise on the faces of those around him. To him, this wasn't just a statement. It was a performance designed to dominate headlines and social media feeds. For those watching at home. It was a startling moment. Some supporters cheered at the boldness, admiring the way he refused to play by traditional political rules. To them, he was saying what others were too afraid to say. But for many others, the word carried a sting. It wasn't just a political jab, it was a personal insult against a former president who still commanded deep respect among millions of Americans. Calling someone a psycho on live television stripped away any sense of formality that might normally govern such high-profile exchanges. It was raw, cutting, and impossible to ignore. The insult didn't come out of nowhere. Trump had long criticized Obama, questioning his decisions, mocking his policies, and taking shots at his character. But this moment felt different. The live setting, the millions of eyes watching, and the sheer bluntness of the word psycho created a shockwave that spread instantly across the internet. Clips of the moment began circulating before the show had even gone to its first commercial break. On Twitter, the hashtag with both men's names was trending within minutes. As people rushed to share their disbelief or their approval, in the studio, you could feel the tension shift. The audience wasn't just reacting to an insult, they were reacting to the boldness of a man who seemed to have no filter. This wasn't a carefully crafted political critique. It was a gut punch. The cameras panned briefly to Obama, capturing his calm face, but in that brief moment before he spoke, the spotlight remained fixed on Trump. His words had set the tone, disrupted the rhythm of the discussion, and challenged everyone present to deal with the fallout. The atmosphere was alive with uncertainty. What would Obama do? Would he ignore it, brush it off with humor, or hit back just as hard? The insult had thrown down a challenge, and everyone knew the response would define the moment. But for that split second, before any reply was given, the focus was entirely on Trump and the audacity it took to say something so jarring on national television. It was more than just an insult, it was a calculated risk. By using such an explosive word, he ensured that no one would forget what he had said. Whether people agreed or disagreed, they would be talking about it. And in politics, sometimes that was the ultimate goal. To dominate the conversation, no matter the cost. When the words left Trump's mouth, the studio was still buzzing from the shock. The insult had landed like a stone thrown into still water, rippling through the audience, the host, and even the viewers at home. But across from him, Barack Obama sat steady. He didn't rush to respond, didn't raise his voice, and didn't show any sign that the remark had gotten under his skin. Instead, he leaned back slightly in his chair, placed one hand on the armrest, and exhaled quietly as if to say, "I've heard worse." That was his strength in moments like this, his ability to remain calm when others tried to provoke him. Trump thrived on reactions. His style had always been to shake the room, to force his opponents to play on his terms. If Obama had snapped back with anger, if he had raised his tone or looked rattled, the balance would have tilted in Trump's favor. But that wasn't Obama's way. He had spent 8 years in the White House facing constant criticism, attacks from both opponents and commentators. He knew the value of composure, especially when millions were watching. And in this moment, his calmness was as much a strategy as it was a reflection of his character. He reached for his glass of water, taking a slow sip, and when he set it down, the audience seemed to settle with him. That simple act sent a subtle message. He was not shaken, not intimidated, not even slightly moved by the word that had just been thrown at him. While Trump thrived in creating tension, Obama's presence began to diffuse it without him even speaking. Yet, it was a reminder of why many had admired his leadership style, measured, deliberate, and unflinching in the face of confrontation. The camera zoomed in on his face, capturing that small, almost amused smile. It wasn't arrogance, but rather a signal that he wasn't going to be dragged into a shouting match. This was the calm before the storm, and everyone in the room knew it. The audience leaned in, anticipating his reply. But what struck them most in that moment was not what he said, but how he carried himself. That composure became the story in itself. Obama versus Trump. Restraint versus provocation. Asterisk for Trump, the silence must have felt uncomfortable. He had thrown out an explosive word, expecting a heated exchange, maybe even a stumble. Instead, Obama's calmness created a void, leaving Trump's insult hanging in the air longer than intended. That pause gave everyone a chance to reflect on the weight of what had just been said, and it magnified the sense that the room was waiting for Obama to reclaim control of the conversation. Asterisk when he finally leaned forward. Obama's movements were deliberate. His voice remained steady, even warm, without a trace of irritation. He chose not to mirror Trump's aggression, but to set a completely different tone. By doing so, he highlighted the contrast between the two men. One relied on shock and confrontation. The other used composure as his weapon. It was a chess move, not a boxing match. Asterisk the audience responded to that calmness. People who might have been bracing for a heated argument found themselves nodding, reassured by the steady hand Obama displayed. In a world where political discourse often spiraled into chaos, his ability to remain centered was a quality that drew people in. And in this particular moment, it allowed him to seize control of the stage without raising his voice or trading insults. Asterisk the more he spoke, the clearer it became that his calmness wasn't just about maintaining appearances, it was about winning the moment. Trump had wanted to dominate with force, but Obama was showing that true strength didn't need to shout. His composure under fire was a quiet form of power, and the audience could feel it. Asterisk even those who disagreed with him politically had to acknowledge it. The contrast was undeniable. Trump had hurled an insult that demanded chaos, but Obama's calm demeanor turned that chaos back on its source. It was the kind of control that couldn't be faked, the product of years spent facing pressure at the highest levels. And in that studio, under the bright lights and millions of eyes, his calmness was the sharpest response he could give. Asterisk. When Trump called him a psycho, the insult seemed to hang in the air longer than anyone expected. It was the kind of word designed to sting, to provoke, to push an opponent into a corner where emotion takes over. But when Obama finally leaned forward and began to speak, it was clear he wasn't going to let that label stick. Instead of defending himself in a personal way, he shifted the focus outward, making the insult less about him and more about the millions of people who had placed their trust in him. That was the brilliance of his response. He flipped the remark completely on its head. Asterisk. He started by addressing the word directly, not dodging it or brushing it aside. When you call me a psycho, he said calmly, you're not just talking about me. Right away, that reframing changed the tone of the moment. He took what was meant to be a personal jab and turned it into something bigger. Something tied to the choices and voices of the American people. In that instant, the insult no longer stood as an attack against one man. It became an attack against an entire era of voters who had elected him twice. Asterisk. Obama reminded the audience, and by extension the country, that for 8 years, citizens had placed their confidence in his leadership. They had stood in lines, cast their ballots, and believed in a vision for progress. To call him a psycho was, in his words, to call all of those Americans crazy. The moment he said it, the audience reacted. Applause broke out. Cheers rang through the studio, and the energy shifted away from the sting of Trump's insult toward the power of Obama's defense. Asterisk. Trump had intended to belittle him, but the way Obama framed it actually strengthened his position. Rather than isolating himself, he connected his personal dignity to the dignity of the people who supported him. That's what made the counter so effective. It wasn't a battle of egos. It was a reminder that democracy is built on the collective will of the people, and when you insult the leader they chose, you're really insulting them. Asterisk. This strategy was classic Obama, measured, intellectual, but also deeply personal in how it resonated. He didn't shout, he didn't insult back. He simply showed how words matter, and how careless words can reveal more about the speaker than the target. When he said, they weren't crazy, they were thoughtful, they were tired of division, and they wanted progress, it struck a chord. Suddenly, the narrative had flipped. Trump's insult was no longer landing as sharp or clever. It was being held up as evidence of dismissiveness toward millions of citizens. Asterisk. The crowd's reaction made it clear who had won that exchange. People were on their feet, clapping, nodding, some even chanting in support. Obama had taken what was meant to humiliate him and turned it into a rallying cry. His calm tone carried even more weight because he didn't need to elevate his voice to make the room feel the gravity of his words. Asterisk. For Trump, this wasn't the reaction he had planned. The insult had been meant to dominate the conversation, to put his opponent off balance, to create a spectacle. Instead, it gave Obama the perfect opportunity to show his ability to stay composed and to shift the insult into a broader moral point. The cameras caught Trump's expression tightening slightly, the smirk fading just enough to reveal that the moment hadn't gone as expected. Asterisk. What made Obama's response resonate was the subtle way he turned the spotlight back on Trump, saying, If speaking clearly, respecting people, and putting country over ego makes me a psycho in your book, then maybe that tells us more about your book than it does about me. He didn't just defend himself, he put the weight of judgment back where it belonged, without calling Trump names, without stooping to the same level. He made it clear that the insult revealed more about Trump's character than his own. Asterisk, that was the flip. The word meant to damage him was now being used as a mirror, reflecting back on the one who had spoken it, and as the audience roared with approval, the power of that moment became undeniable. Obama had not only neutralized the insult, he had turned it into a lesson, a piece of political theater that would outlast the segment and play over and over in news clips and social media debates. Asterisk, by flipping the insult in this way, he did what skilled communicators do best. He turned a moment of attack into a moment of strength. What was supposed to be a weapon against him became a tool he used to reinforce his leadership style and reconnect with the very people Trump had indirectly insulted, and in the eyes of those watching, it was clear who had gained the upper hand. Asterisk. The exchange between Trump and Obama had already created a charged atmosphere, but it was the aftermath that cemented the moment in people's memories. Trump's blunt insult had sparked the controversy, and Obama's calm and sharp response had shifted the energy of the room. What happened next was the ripple effect, the lasting impact that made the moment go viral and echo across conversations long after the camera stopped rolling. Asterisk, as soon as Obama finished turning the insult back on Trump, the audience erupted into loud applause. It wasn't polite. Clapping, it was the kind of reaction that filled the studio with undeniable energy. People stood up, some cheering, some whistling, and the sound of the crowd drowned out the silence that had followed Trump's original remark. In that instant, the balance of power in the room had shifted entirely. What had started as Trump's bold attempt to dominate the discussion had turned into a showcase of Obama's composure and intelligence. Asterisk, the response spread quickly. Within minutes, clips of the exchange were being shared across social media. On Twitter, the video racked up millions of views, with people quoting Obama's words about respect, dignity, and the will of the voters. Hashtags with both men's names trended globally. Memes popped up, headlines broke out across major news outlets, and debates began in living rooms, offices, and coffee shops. The live moment had transformed into a cultural flashpoint. Asterisk, what stood out most wasn't just Obama's words, but the way he had delivered them. People admired how he hadn't raised his voice or resorted to personal attacks. His calmness was a stark contrast to Trump's raw style, and that contrast made the exchange even more striking. It was a reminder that strength doesn't always come from being the loudest in the room. Sometimes it comes from being the most measured. Viewers who might not have agreed with Obama politically still found themselves nodding at how effectively he handled the situation. Asterisk, for Trump, the fallout was complicated. While his supporters praised him for telling it like it is, many others saw the moment as a misstep. The insult had given Obama the chance to deliver a powerful counter that not only defended himself, but also reframed the discussion in a way that left Trump looking dismissive. In politics, perception is everything. And the perception of that moment was clear. Obama had owned the stage without breaking a sweat. Asterisk, news analysts dissected the moment endlessly. Commentators replayed the clip, pointing out the way Obama paused before responding, how he made the insult bigger than himself by connecting it to the voters, and how his final remark cleverly turned Trump's words back against him. Late-night hosts joked about the exchange, but even in humor, the underlying truth was the same. Obama had won that round. Asterisk, the long-term impact was even greater. The moment became a reference point in future debates, speeches, and interviews. Whenever discussions about political composure, leadership under pressure, or the power of words came up, this exchange was cited as an example. It wasn't just about a heated argument on television. It had become a case study in communication and control. Asterisk, Obama's ability to flip the insult and respond with calm intelligence resonated with people because it showed how to navigate conflict without losing composure. In a world where arguments often devolved into shouting matches, his approach was refreshing. It set a standard for how leaders could respond to personal attacks while still keeping the focus on larger principles. Asterisk, for Trump, the moment reinforced his reputation as someone unafraid to shock, but it also revealed the risks of that approach. The insult had drawn attention, yes, but it had also provided his opponent with a platform to shine. By calling Obama a psycho, he had opened the door to a response that became far more memorable than the insult itself. Asterisk, the lasting impact of the exchange wasn't that Trump had thrown out a harsh word, it was that Obama had transformed it into something bigger, something that reflected on values, respect, and leadership. That was why the story didn't fade after the broadcast. It lingered, replayed, and resurfaced, because people saw in it a clash of two very different styles, and the calm response was the one that endured. Asterisk, in the end, it was the ripple effect that defined the moment. The way audiences responded, the way the media amplified it, and the way it became a cultural talking point all pointed to the same truth. A single sharp comeback, delivered with calm intelligence, can overshadow even the boldest insult. And for Obama, that night proved once again that composure in the face of provocation carries a power all its own. Asterisk. As the broadcast drew to a close, the studio still buzzed with energy from what had just unfolded. Trump's cutting remark had been meant to dominate the night, to etch his words into headlines and spark the kind of chaos that he often thrived on, and in a way it did. People couldn't stop talking about the insult, the rawness of it, and the shock it delivered. But when the dust settled, it wasn't the word psycho that echoed the loudest, it was the way Obama had responded. Asterisk. That single exchange became more than just a moment on live TV. It became a study in how leadership is perceived, how words can be flipped, and how calmness can disarm even the sharpest attack. Obama's decision not to match fire with fire, but instead to broaden the meaning of the insult and tie it back to the voters, gave the moment a depth that resonated far beyond the studio audience. He didn't just defend himself, he turned the tables and reframed the insult into a conversation about respect, democracy, and the choices of millions of Americans. Asterisk. The impact of that choice stretched far beyond politics. For ordinary viewers, the exchange carried lessons about composure in everyday life. Insults and provocations are not confined to debate stages. They happen in workplaces, schools, and homes. The instinct to react with anger is natural, but the ability to respond with calmness and clarity can shift the dynamic completely. Obama's measured reply showed that control often carries more weight than confrontation. It was a reminder that dignity is a form of strength. Asterisk. For Trump, the moment reinforced both sides of his reputation. To his supporters, his willingness to call it as he saw it was refreshing, a sign that he would never bow to political niceties. To his critics, however, the exchange underscored the risks of bluntness without strategy. By reducing his opponent to a single word, he gave that opponent the perfect opening to craft a response that would live longer and spread further. The contrast was stark. One man relied on shock, the other on composure, and the audience made clear which approach carried the day. Asterisk. The lasting takeaway from that night was not about who won or lost a single exchange, but about the larger principles. It highlighted, in a world saturated with noise, insults, and heated rhetoric, the ability to remain steady and thoughtful stands out even more. Leadership is not simply about speaking the loudest. It's about speaking in a way that leaves an impression of strength, fairness, and perspective. Asterisk. In the end, the exchange reminded everyone watching that words have power, not only the power to wound, but also the power to uplift, to reframe, and to inspire. Trump's remark grabbed attention, but Obama's response gave the moment meaning. And long after the applause faded and the cameras shut off, it was the calm intelligence of that reply that lingered, reminding the audience of the lasting strength found